Jumoke had always been a dedicated mother, wife, and businesswoman. In the bustling heart of Johannesburg, where the sounds of car horns and street vendors filled the air, she managed a successful fabric shop. The days were long, filled with the stress of managing her shop, the traffic, and dealing with demanding customers. Yet, something about tonight felt different. The air in her compound was thick and heavy, a silence lingering in the air that seemed out of place. Normally, her children Bontal and Sibusizo would be playing outside, eagerly awaiting her return, but today, all she heard was an eerie silence. When she pushed open the heavy metal gate, she knew something was wrong. As she stepped inside, her sister Naledi stood waiting at the door, her face pale, her hands trembling. Jumoke's instincts screamed that something was off. "Sister, there's something you need to know," Naledi's voice trembled. Jumoke felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she entered the house, her mind racing. She had no idea what her sister would say next, but she knew it would change everything. Naledi's hands were shaking as she stood before Jumoke. The words she spoke were heavy with dread. "I was downstairs preparing lunch when I heard noises coming from Bontal's room," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I went upstairs, and when I opened the door, Bontal wasn't wearing any clothes. Sibusizo was there, and the moment I opened the door, Sibusizo ran out of the room." Jumoke's heart skipped a beat. Her mind struggled to comprehend the words. Bontal and Sibusizo were only 9 years old. They were innocent. Her mind raced as she tried to process what her sister was saying, but the words didn't make sense. Jumoke tried to push the fear away. "Are you sure, Naledi? Are you really sure of what you're saying?" she asked, though her voice trembled. Naledi's eyes flashed with frustration, and she quickly responded, "I saw what I saw. I would never lie about something so serious, Jumoke." Her sister's words rang in her ears, but Jumoke couldn't bring herself to believe it. This was too much to bear. The children, her precious twins, the ones she loved and protected, couldn't possibly be involved in something like this. Could they? Jumoke's mind was a storm of confusion as she stood there, staring at Naledi. She had always trusted her sister, but the thought of her children being involved in something so disturbing left her paralyzed with disbelief. After a long silence, Jumoke finally mustered the strength to walk up to the twins, who were sitting innocently on the couch, waiting for her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest as she asked them, "We need to talk. Auntie Naledi told me something, and I need to know the truth." The twins exchanged confused glances. Sibusizo, always the more curious of the two, looked up at her with wide eyes. "What did she say, Mom?" he asked softly. Jumoke took a deep breath and continued, her voice steady but laced with concern. "She said something happened in Bontal's room today. She said you were both naked." The room fell silent. Bontal, the more outspoken twin, shook her head furiously. "No, Mommy, that's a lie. We didn't do anything." Her voice was firm, almost defensive. "We didn't do anything bad. Auntie Naledi is lying," Sibusizo added, his tone resolute. The twins' conviction only deepened Jumoke's confusion. Their innocence was clear in their eyes, yet Naledi's story seemed undeniable. Why would she lie? But at the same time, how could her children be involved in something like this? As the days passed, Jumoke tried to push aside the haunting conversation with Naledi. She told herself it must have been a misunderstanding. But something about it lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her. One afternoon, as she was cleaning Sibusizo's room, her eyes caught a glimpse of something in the drawer. She hesitated before opening it, unsure of what she might find. When she did, her heart sank. There, neatly folded among his clothes, was Bontal's underwear. Her mind raced as she stared at it, unable to make sense of it. How did Bontal's underwear end up in Sibusizo's drawer? She called out for him, her voice shaking as she asked, "Sibusizo, why is this here?" The boy came rushing into the room, his face full of concern. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked nervously. Jumoke held up the underwear, her fingers trembling. "Why is this in your drawer, Sibusaizo?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes widened in confusion. "I don't know, Mom, I swear I didn't put it there," he said, his voice cracking with fear. Jumoke's heart pounded as she struggled to make sense of the situation. The feeling in her gut told her something was terribly wrong. "Do you expect me to believe that lie, Sibusaizo?" she asked, her voice rising in frustration. Sibusaizo, his face pale, stumbled over his words. "Maybe Auntie Naledi put it there by accident when she was folding our clothes," he suggested, but even he seemed unsure. Jumoke didn't know what to believe, but the knot in her stomach tightened. Jumoke couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but she knew she needed to speak with her husband, Benga. She needed him to understand the seriousness of the situation. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, she sat him down. Her heart raced as she explained everything, what Naledi had told her, the underwear, and her growing concerns. Benga listened quietly, his face expressionless as she spoke. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Jumoke, this is ridiculous," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "They're just children, you're overthinking this." His dismissal of her concerns only fueled the anger and fear bubbling inside her. "But Benga, how can you say that?" Jumoke asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm not overthinking anything, something is wrong, and I need to know what's going on." Benga didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. He simply shook his head and walked away. Jumoke stood there, stunned by his reaction. How could he be so calm, so dismissive? She knew something deeper was happening, but Benga refused to acknowledge it. The more she thought about it, the more it felt like she was on her own in this. As the night grew darker, Jumoke lay awake in bed, the unsettling silence of the house weighing heavily on her. The children had fallen asleep earlier, but she couldn't find peace. Her mind kept returning to the strange events of the past few days, her sister's accusations, the underwear in Sibusaizo's drawer, and Benga's dismissal of it all. But there was something else. An odd, inexplicable feeling tugged at her. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound. It was a scratching noise, followed by a soft tapping, almost like someone was lightly knocking on a door. She listened intently, her heart thumping in her chest. The house was eerily quiet, except for this sound. She cautiously got out of bed, tiptoeing toward the hallway. As she reached the door to the twins' room, the sound stopped abruptly. Jumoke's breath caught in her throat. Could it be that her children were awake, playing or doing something they shouldn't be? She slowly pushed the door open and peered inside. The room was dark, and the twins were sound asleep, just as she had left them. But her gut told her something was amiss. She closed the door quietly, retreating back to her room. The unease in her chest refused to settle. That night, she lay awake for hours, trying to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The strange noise, her growing suspicions, it all felt connected. But to what? And why couldn't she make sense of it? In the days that followed, Jumoke couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her. Something wasn't right, and her instincts told her to investigate further. One afternoon, while Benga was at work, she decided to take a closer look at the twins' things. She started with Sibusaizo's room, methodically searching through his belongings, hoping to find something that might explain the strange occurrences. While rifling through his drawers, she found a small, leather-bound journal wedged between his clothes. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to open it, but her curiosity won out. When she flipped it open, her breath caught in her throat. The pages were filled with cryptic drawings, symbols that seemed strange and unfamiliar. There were pages of scribbled words, but the handwriting was erratic, as if written in a rush. One page, in particular, caught her eye. It was a drawing of a figure, tall, shadowy, and with eyes that seemed to pierce through the paper. Below it were words in a language she couldn't understand. Jumoke's hand trembled as she turned the page. The next entry seemed to be a warning. Do not speak of the shadows. Her heart pounded as the reality of the situation began to sink in. What was Sibusizo hiding? And what had Bontal told him to keep quiet about? The journal offered more questions than answers, but one thing was certain: her children were hiding something from her, something that was too dangerous to ignore. Jumoke couldn't keep quiet any longer. The journal, the strange noises, Bontal's odd behavior, it all led to one conclusion. Her children were involved in something they shouldn't be, and it was time to confront them. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Jumoke's eyes scanned the twins, searching for any sign of guilt or fear. Sibusizo Bontal, she began, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. I know something's going on. You need to tell me the truth. What's this about the shadows, and what's in that journal? The twins exchanged a nervous glance, their faces paling. I don't know what you're talking about, Mom, Sibusizo stammered, but his eyes darted nervously to Bontal. Jumoke's eyes narrowed. Don't lie to me, Sibusizo, she said sternly. I found the journal, and I saw the drawings. This isn't something I can just ignore. Tell me what's happening. The twins fell silent, their lips trembling as if they were struggling to find the right words. Finally, Bontal spoke up, her voice small and shaky. It's not our fault, Mom, she whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. We didn't ask for this. We didn't want it. Jumoke's heart ached as she listened to her daughter's words, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. What do you mean? What is going on? She demanded, her patience wearing thin. Bontal took a deep breath, her eyes filled with sorrow. We didn't know, Mom. We didn't know that the shadows would follow us. It started when we found the old book in the attic. We didn't think it would do anything, but now it's too late. Jumoke's mind reeled. The old book? What was she talking about? And the shadows? She had no idea what they were referring to, but she knew that whatever it was, it had a hold on her children, and that terrified her. The following morning, Jumoke made her way up to the attic, her heart racing. Bontal had mentioned an old book, and it was clear now that this book held the key to the strange events unfolding in their home. She'd never paid much attention to the attic before, but now, it felt like the only place she could search for answers. As she climbed the narrow staircase, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in on her. She switched on the light and began to sift through old boxes filled with dusty photographs and forgotten trinkets. Then, near the corner, something caught her eye, a large leather-bound book, its cover cracked and worn. It looked ancient, as if it had been there for generations. Jumoke picked it up carefully, her fingers trembling as she opened the cover. Inside were pages filled with strange markings, much like the ones in Sibusizo's journal. The more she read, the more the words seemed to pull her in. There were stories of shadows that followed people, whispers in the night, and dark rituals meant to trap souls. She turned another page, and her heart skipped a beat. To break the curse, one must face the shadows, but be warned, some shadows cannot be defeated. Jumoke's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just some old book. It was the source of whatever had begun to unravel her family's life. The more Jumoke read from the book, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a tale of folklore, it was a curse that had followed her family, and now her children had unknowingly become part of it. The shadows were real, and they were not simply figments of her imagination. They were malevolent forces, powerful and ancient, that had attached themselves to her children the moment they opened that cursed book. She couldn't believe what she was reading. The book described how the shadows would twist the minds of those they touched, making them believe things that weren't true, leading them to commit unspeakable acts. It also explained the strange behavior she had witnessed, the silence, the odd drawings, the cryptic journal entries. Jumoke's heart pounded as she realized that the only way to stop the curse was to confront the shadows directly. But what did that mean for her children? How could she save them when she didn't even understand what the shadows were? She looked down at the final page, where one sentence stood out in bold letters. The one who awakens the shadows must be prepared to face the darkness within themselves. Could it be that the shadows had been awakened by the children's curiosity? Had they opened a door that was never meant to be opened? Jumoke felt a wave of dread wash over her as she knew the battle ahead would be unlike anything she had ever faced. But one thing was certain, she would not allow her family to fall prey to this curse. She would fight until the end. Jumoke's mind raced as she pieced together the ancient words from the cursed book. Every step she took seemed to lead her deeper into a world of darkness she had never imagined. There was no turning back now. The only way to stop the curse was to face the shadows, and to do that, she would need help. But who could she trust? Who would believe in such a dark and twisted force? That night, Jumoke gathered the twins together in the living room. The air was thick with tension, the once familiar walls of their home now seeming foreign and oppressive. "We need to confront this head-on," she told them, her voice steady but laced with fear. "There's no other choice. The shadows have taken hold of you both, and we need to break their power." Sibusizo and Bontal exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their secret now fully exposed. But deep down, Jumoke knew they were ready to face what had been haunting them. They had no other choice. "I can feel them," Bontal whispered, her voice trembling. "They're always watching us, they've never left." Jumoke nodded grimly. "That's because we haven't confronted them. We've been hiding from them. But the only way to break free is to face the darkness within." The twins nodded, their faces pale but determined. Jumoke took a deep breath and turned to the door. "We have to find the place where the curse began. We need to go to the attic. I think that's where the shadows are strongest." Together, they ascended the stairs to the attic, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. The air grew heavier as they approached the room where the cursed book had been found. It was as though something unseen was waiting for them. Jumoke reached for the door handle, but before she could turn it, a voice whispered from the shadows. The whisper echoed through the attic, sending a chill down Jumoke's spine. She froze, her breath caught in her throat, as the temperature in the room dropped. The twins stood beside her, their faces etched with fear, but also with determination. They had to face this, and they had to face it together. The shadows began to take shape, dark figures slowly emerging from the corners of the attic. They moved like smoke, their forms shifting and twisting in unnatural ways. Jumoke could barely make out their faces, but their presence was suffocating. They were here, and they weren't going to let them leave easily. Sibusizo's voice shook as he spoke. "What do we do, Mom?" Jumoke swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. "We have to break the curse. We need to destroy the book." The shadows hissed in unison, their voices a cacophony of whispers. "You cannot destroy what is already a part of you." Jumoke clenched her fists, the weight of their words sinking in. She had to push forward. There was no going back now. Taking a deep breath, she stepped toward the center of the room, holding the cursed book in her hands. She had read enough to know that she had to confront the darkness head-on. She closed her eyes and whispered the incantation from the book, the ancient words that were meant to banish the shadows. Then, the shadows roared, a terrible, deafening sound that made the very walls of the house tremble. The shadows lunged, swirling around Jumoke, as if trying to tear her apart. She screamed out, but the words of the incantation surged within her, pushing the shadows back. They shrieked in pain, their forms flickering in and out of existence. Sibusizo and Bontal stood by her side, their hands raised, focusing all their energy on helping their mother. The shadows hissed in fury, their power growing stronger with every moment, But Jumoke's resolve did not falter. She had to protect her children, no matter the cost. With one final cry, she threw the cursed book into the air. It burst into flames, the pages igniting and disintegrating in an instant. The shadows screeched, their forms unraveling as if the book had been their only tether to this world. For a brief moment, the attic was silent, and the air grew still. Then, as quickly as it had started, the darkness began to fade. The shadows melted into the air, dissipating into nothingness. The oppressive weight that had hung over the house lifted, and the warmth returned to the room. Jumoke collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, her heart racing. The battle was over. But was the curse truly broken? The twins ran to her, their faces pale but relieved. "It's over, Mom," Bontal whispered. "We did it." Jumoke looked around, her chest heavy with the weight of what they had just experienced. She wasn't sure if the shadows had truly been banished. But one thing was certain, she had fought for her family, and she would do it again if it meant protecting them from the darkness. And as the first light of dawn broke through the window, Jumoke realized that their lives had changed forever. The curse was gone, at least for now. But she would always be ready, standing guard against whatever shadows might rise again. The light of dawn filtered softly through the curtains, bathing the room in a warm, comforting glow. Jumoke stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The events of the past few days were a blur, a storm of emotions, fear and betrayal. Her heart was still racing from the terrifying battle with the shadows, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The house, once again filled with light and warmth, seemed to have a lingering darkness that no amount of daylight could banish. Sibusaizo and Bontal sat on the couch, their faces pale from the ordeal. They had faced the darkness and come out on the other side, but Jumoke knew they would never be the same. They were still children, yet the things they had seen, the horrors that had invaded their once innocent lives, would shape them forever. "Mom," Bontal whispered, breaking the silence. "Are we safe now? The shadows are gone, right?" Jumoke turned from the window, her face softening as she looked at her children. "For now, yes, but the truth is, we don't know for sure. The curse may be broken, but we can't forget what we've been through. We have to stay vigilant." Sibusaizo nodded solemnly, his eyes still filled with fear. "It was all so real, Mom. I thought we were going to be trapped forever." Jumoke sat down beside them, wrapping her arms around her children. "I know, darling, I felt the same way, but we fought back, and that's what matters. You showed strength today that I didn't know you had." Bontal leaned into her mother's embrace, but her small voice trembled as she asked, "What if it comes back? What if the shadows return?" Jumoke's heart tightened. "We will be ready, Bontal. We will face it together. As a family, no matter what comes our way, we'll stand strong." But even as she said the words, a gnawing fear settled deep in her chest. She had broken the curse, yes. But at what cost? The shadows had been a manifestation of something far more sinister, something that had lived within her family's history for generations. Was it truly gone, or had they merely postponed its return? That night, after the children were in bed, Jumoke sat in the living room alone, staring at the empty space where the cursed book had once been. She had destroyed it, but there was still a part of her that feared its power might have found another way to seep back into their lives. Her mind raced with thoughts of what had truly happened. Was it her fault for not recognizing the signs sooner? Had her own dark secrets been the key to the curse's return? Her phone buzzed, shaking her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen to see a message from Shola. "I'm sorry, please, let's talk." Jumoke's stomach twisted. She had not heard from Shola since the confrontation. She had not wanted to hear from her sister, her betrayer, but something inside her stirred. Could she truly forgive her? Could she even face her? The truth was, Jumoke wasn't sure. She didn't know if she had the strength to forgive the woman who had slept with her husband and, unknowingly, set in motion the events that had led them to this point. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that holding on to this anger would only drag her down, further into the darkness. Perhaps if she faced Shola one last time, she could finally lay her demons to rest. With a sigh, Jumoke tapped out a response. "Meet me tomorrow, we need to talk." The next day, Jumoke sat across from Shola at a small cafe, the tension between them palpable. Shola looked smaller, worn, as if the weight of her guilt had aged her beyond her years. Her eyes were red from crying, and she hadn't spoken much since she'd arrived. Jumoke had her own emotions, anger, betrayal, and confusion, but she also had a need for closure. She needed to know why her sister had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And yet, there was a part of her that still wanted to understand what had driven Shola to make such a disastrous choice. Shola stared down at her coffee cup, her hands shaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she said quietly, her voice full of sorrow. "I don't even know how it started, it just happened." Jumoke took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she processed her sister's words. "How could you, Shola? How could you betray me like this? I gave you everything, my home, my trust, and my love, and you repaid me by destroying everything." Shola's face crumpled, and she began to cry openly. "I'm sorry, Jumoke, I was weak, I was lost, and when Banga started paying attention to me, I didn't know how to stop. I never meant to hurt you, I was just lonely." Jumoke's anger flared, but she fought to keep it in check. She had to hear her out, had to understand. "You were lonely, that's why you slept with my husband, and what about the curse? Did you even know what was happening? Did you even care?" Shola shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I didn't know. I didn't understand what was going on. But when you started noticing, and when the children started acting strange, I realized that there was something bigger at play. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose everything." Jumoke sat in silence, her heart torn. She had wanted to hear an explanation, but this was so much more than she had expected. The betrayal had run so deep, so far beyond what she could have ever imagined. Finally, she stood up, her hands trembling at her sides. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Shola. What you did, it broke me." Shola stood as well, her face pleading. "Please, Jumoke, I know I can't undo what's been done, but I want to make it right. I want to fix things." Jumoke's heart hardened. "You can't fix this, Shola. You've taken too much from me, too much from us." With a final, weary glance at her sister, Jumoke turned and walked away. The road to healing would be long and uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She could never go back to the way things were. The curse might have been broken, but the wounds of betrayal would never fully heal. The shadows might be gone, but the scars they left would remain forever. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe on my channels for more videos. Thanks.